Hey guys, tonight we slip onto the damp sand of a shore that isn't on any map, the kind of place where the sea itself seems embarrassed by its secrets. Foam curls and milky ribbons around your ankles, and the air smells of salt, crushed figs. And something sweeter you can't quite name, something like temptation baked under the sun. Out there, rising with an almost lazy roll of the tide, comes a shimmer that is not moonlight at all but skin. Flawless and glistening, as if the gods decided to sculpt perfection just to see what mortals would do with it. You already know you probably won't survive this, because when a goddess appears unclothed in front of an audience that can barely handle a toga malfunction, civilization itself is bound to trip over its sandals. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love knowing who else is wide awake when history is at its strangest. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow the ripple of her steps as Aphrodite drifts forward, every movement both awkward and magnetic, like a dancer not entirely sure of her own choreography. Her hair drips in strands that catch the starlight, and her eyes carry the smugness of someone who has discovered the cheat codes to human behavior. The thing is, she hasn't mastered them as smoothly as she likes to claim. Even gods have their bloopers, and Aphrodite's arsenal of love tricks is as much about fumbles as flawless victories. The first awkward tactic? Overcompensating. Think of that friend who insists every joke they tell is hilarious, so you laugh out of politeness, and then later admit, no, it wasn't. Aphrodite has moments like that. 2. Ancient writers whispered that her overwhelming beauty could make men dizzy, but sometimes it left them paralyzed, unable to act at all. Imagine walking into a room so dazzling you forget how doors work. That's the kind of glitch she produced. You drift closer and realize her power is not just about the blush of skin or the sway of hips. It's the art of planting ideas in minds already restless. There's a story tucked away in Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings about royal mistresses who relied on strange little gestures to hold influence, like purposely dropping a glove so the king would bend to retrieve it, subtly reminding him who truly bent to whom. Aphrodite, in her own way, was the prototype of this. She didn't just inspire attraction. She orchestrated dependence, often clumsily, sometimes brilliantly. Historians still argue whether Paris fell for Helen because of his own adolescent giddiness or because Aphrodite bombarded him with what we'd now call awkward pickup lines, disguised as divine promises. Either way, the poor boy never stood a chance. The beach you're standing on shifts. Suddenly, you're not merely in myth, but brushing against odd corners of human history. Take for example the Egyptians, who once believed that eating lettuce, yes, the humble lettuce boosted passion because it was associated with Min, their fertility god. Aphrodite would have smirked at that, sliding lettuce onto the dinner table with a wink that probably confused her dinner guests more than it seduced them. One quirky tidbit after another swirls around her. The Kama Sutra suggests that awkward silences during intimacy can be patched with playful bites or nonsense syllables, as if babbling could salvage mood. You can almost picture Aphrodite coaching mortals with this, half giggling at the absurdity while pretending she's the ultimate authority. But here's where the story sharpens. Aphrodite's tricks weren't just clumsy games of bedroom humor. They had seismic consequences. Helen, the so-called face that launched 1,000 ships, became the centerpiece of one of history's most notorious wars, and Aphrodite was the stagehand pulling strings from the wings. You tread behind her as she steps inland, foam dripping from her toes, and you sense how these small fumbling manipulations, an extra glance, a misplaced promise, an inconveniently timed flutter of charm-set dominoes falling toward Troy. The irony is that these maneuvers don't feel grand or cinematic in the moment. They feel messy, personal, and almost laughably small. Yet from those laughable slips comes the thunder of 10 years of bloodshed, the echo of which still rattles through classrooms, libraries, and bedtime stories like this, one dot as she dries her hair with nothing but the wind. You realize Aphrodite's greatest awkward trick was convincing mortals that desire was both sacred and ridiculous at the same time. She blurred lines between reverence and embarrassment, showing up like a goddess and behaving like the mischievous friend who pushes you into confessing crushes you swore you'd keep secret. And you're already caught, staring too long, leaning too close, stepping into a tale where seduction is not sleek but stumbling, not perfect but powerful enough to reshape the destiny of cities. The surf sighs behind you, the stars smirk above you, and the war drums of Troy begin to tremble faintly on the horizon. You trail behind Aphrodite as the beach dissolves into a palace hallway, polished floors catching reflections of torchlight, the air buzzing with perfumes that try too hard: myrrh, cinnamon, something sharp enough to sting your nose. Helen drifts past you, her robe whispering like a secret in motion, her gaze darting between duty and desire. She has already lived as the Queen of Sparta, already endured the stiff expectations of a marriage that was more treaty than tenderness. And yet there's Aphrodite whispering over her shoulder like a mischievous life coach. The goddess doesn't deliver smooth, cinematic speeches. She mutters, she cajoles. She uses the kind of tips you'd expect from a poorly reviewed dating manual. Tilt your head this way, smile just long enough to make him nervous. Pause before speaking so he fills the silence with his own longing. Helen resists. Of course, what self-respecting queen would gamble her entire world for the sulky charm of Paris, a Trojan prince who is more pretty face than proven warrior? But then comes that awkward coaching again, an insistence that attraction is a form of fate, not choice. You can almost hear Aphrodite saying, "Trust me, this will be hilarious." It's not hilarious. It's messy. Helen's lips tremble between no and yes, her fingers clutching fabric until the knuckles whiten, and you realize you're watching the slow unfurling of desire dressed as inevitability. Historians still argue whether Helen truly fell in love, or whether she was manipulated into lust so strong it masqueraded as destiny. Some say she followed Paris willingly, burning with passion. Others claim she was spirited away, more captive than co-conspirator. The truth slides like oil through the cracks, impossible to pin down. And that uncertainty is exactly the awkward genius of Aphrodite's meddling. She blurs the lines so thoroughly that even millennia later we can't tell whether Helen's heart leapt or was shoved. Meanwhile, Aphrodite keeps layering on her bizarre strategies. One story buried in Michel Foucault's musings on the history of sexuality describes how, in antiquity, beauty was often treated less as personal gift and more as a form of public currency, traded and manipulated. Helen becomes that currency. In real time, her desirability spun like gold thread through a loom controlled by Aphrodite's fidgeting fingers. Paris, poor boy, is handed the keys to desire without the manual to drive it. And so he stumbles, awkwardly parroting the goddess's tricks. He offers Helen overblown compliments that make him sound less like a lover and more like a bard who lost his audience. You watch him trip over his sandals while trying to appear regal, and you almost want to pat him on the shoulder and suggest a simpler approach, like asking her about her day. But Aphrodite is relentless. She instructs him in charms that verge on parody. Touch her elbow lightly, but not too lightly. Glance away, then back as though distracted by her aura. Compare her beauty to things that don't quite fit Rose's doves, the way sunlight hits bronze armor. Helen laughs once, a brittle sound, and you sense the tension breaking, not because she's swept away, but because the whole performance is so painfully awkward that resistance itself becomes exhausting. That's the trick. Fatigue wears down walls more than passion does. And in that crack of exhaustion, desire slithers in. You remember an anecdote from Peter Webb's The Erotic Spirit Through History about medieval courts where men were taught to woo by deliberately acting clumsy, tripping, or fumbling words so women might lower their guard. That same odd tactic seems to echo here, Paris turning his stumbles into weapons, while Aphrodite nods smugly as though she invented the playbook. Helen sighs, closes her eyes, and when she opens them again, the war has already begun, though no. Ship has yet set sail. Quirky details from other cultures slip into your thoughts as you watch. The ancient Mesopotamians believed a fertility charm could be woven by whispering love spells into dough, and then baking it into bread for the beloved. Imagine Aphrodite passing Helen a loaf and saying, "Don't ask questions, just eat." The absurdity doesn't erase the tension, it heightens it. These rituals, awkward as they sound, work precisely because they force intimacy where none should naturally exist. Helen bites down not on bread, but on inevitability, Paris's hand trembling near hers, and suddenly the silence between them is louder than the chorus of servants outside the door, by the time their gazes lock without Aphrodite's prompting. You know the outcome is sealed. Desire, once awkwardly planted, now grows like ivy, creeping over walls, suffocating reason, curling toward the sky until the structure it clings to cracks. In this case, that structure is Sparta, then Greece, then Troy. You can feel the shuffle of sandals in the hallway as destiny gathers its audience. Helen rises, her robes slipping in a way that isn't choreographed, but is somehow more persuasive than any divine instruction. Paris swallows, his composure cracked, his eagerness obvious. They step toward each other like actors following marks on a stage they don't remember agreeing to perform upon, and you, drifting quietly at their side, realize how absurdly human this all is. A goddess of love, fumbling through awkward tricks. A queen, torn between boredom and longing. A prince, clumsy in his borrowed confidence. Yet from these almost laughable beginnings, the Trojan War ignites, proof that sometimes the greatest conflagrations start not with fire, but with a stammer, a hesitation, a whispered suggestion that maybe, just maybe, the rules of the world don't apply tonight. You follow Paris now as he paces within his father's halls, nervously smoothing the folds of his robe as though fabric could disguise the tremor in his hands. The prince who once strutted across Ida's slopes like a shepherd blessed with divine favor, now stumbles like a boy rehearsing lines before a school play, and it's Aphrodite's voice still whispering in his ear, urging him on with advice. That sounds less like eternal wisdom and more like the ramblings of a flustered ant. Stand tall, she urges, but not too tall. Smile, but not too wide. Kiss her hand, but only after she has looked away. You can almost hear Paris groan inwardly, his confidence wobbling between thrill and terror. Because wooing Helen isn't just seduction, it's theft from Sparta, from Menelaus, from a world order barely held together by fragile alliances. Yet Aphrodite insists that sex and charm are weapons sharper than spears, and Paris, poor boy, believes her. He tries to summon swagger, but instead blurts compliments so tangled they sound rehearsed, eyes darting like a guilty servant. Helen raises her brow in amusement, half entertained, half pitying, and you sense that what binds them now isn't the sweep of love, but the absurd glue of awkwardness that somehow grows stronger the more it's stretched. Historians still argue whether Paris's wooing was deliberate strategy or divine coercion. But in this corridor of flickering oil lamps, you can feel the clumsy sincerity. He tries to touch Helen's wrist, misses, and brushes her sleeve instead. And the silence that follows is louder than a battlefield. Aphrodite hisses guidance like a coach at ringside. Don't pull back, recover, lean into it, and Paris fumbles. Again, his words tripping over themselves until Helen laughs. Not cruelly, but with that dangerous warmth that turns mistakes into endearments. This, ironically, is Aphrodite's hidden genius. By making Paris so awkward, she lowers Helen's defenses, convincing her that power and passion can be found in vulnerability. It's the same tactic used centuries later in royal courts, as Eleanor Herman recounts in Sex with Kings. where mistresses sometimes feigned ignorance of etiquette to make monarchs feel protective. Here, the roles are reversed. Paris is the one bumbling, Helen the one amused, and yet somehow the dynamic shifts until desire is no longer a question, but an inevitability. You can almost see the goddess smirking, recalling other bizarre rituals humans have invented to flirt with fate. The Kama Sutra suggests that in moments of hesitation, a lover might hum a nonsense melody to break the tension. And you imagine Paris trying that crooning like a dove in the middle of the Spartan palace. Ridiculous, yes, but no more ridiculous than the ancient Greek belief that sneezing during a kiss was a divine blessing. These quirky tidbits litter the scene, and you realize Aphrodite's influence is never about grace. It's about persistence, about throwing every strange trick into the pot until something simmers into connection. Paris sneezes nervously once. Helen covers her mouth to hide her grin, and the awkwardness only tightens its grip on both of them. Weight of destiny, though, presses like a stone ceiling. Behind every blush and stammer lies the shadow of Menelaus, Helen's husband, whose absence is less comfort than warning. Paris knows this, feels it in the pit of his stomach, yet Aphrodite eggs him on, promising that beauty stolen is beauty sanctified. That awkwardness can be reframed as charm if one believes hard enough. You feel the air in the chamber thicken, scented with oils and unspoken choices, and you realize Paris is no longer entirely himself. He is a vessel carrying Aphrodite's determination, clumsy as it is, toward a collision history will never stop recounting. From another corner of history drifts a tale that feels uncannily parallel. In medieval France, a mistress once wrote nonsense poetry on slips of parchment, hiding them in a king's boots so he would stumble upon her words at awkward times of day. The effect was not mockery, but endearment, binding him closer through surprise and silliness. Paris embodies that same principle now, each mistake tightening Helen's fascination. She reaches to steady his hand, and in that gesture lies surrender cloaked in sympathy. Aphrodite nods in triumph, even though her methods resemble comedy more than strategy. The scholars debating centuries later might argue about whether Helen's choice was her own, whether Paris was irresistible or simply coached into being irresistible. They may never resolve it, but standing here you feel the answer is simpler. People don't always fall because of beauty or strength. They fall because someone else trips first, and the absurdity of catching them becomes irresistible. Paris loses composure, Helen catches him, and in that clumsy exchange the seeds of war are sown deeper than any spear could pierce. The torches gutter as they draw closer, the sound of sandals shuffling on marble louder than the breathless silence between words. You sense that in the awkward theater Aphrodite has orchestrated. The curtain is rising on a play that will run for a decade, with cities as its stage and blood as its props. Yet in this moment, it still feels fragile, intimate, almost laughable too. Figures fumbling through desire while a goddess suppresses her giggles. You can't help but smile too, because history often forgets that empires toppled not only with swords, but with stammers, blushes, and the awkward weight of a touch that lingers just a little too long. You step now into the echoing chambers of Sparta, where the walls themselves seem to gossip. Every corridor hums with whispers of who slipped into whose bed, what rite was performed under torchlight, and whether love in this land is ever about affection at all, or simply about contracts stitched together with lust and politics. The air is thick with olive oil and smoke from braziers, and somewhere in the distance the clatter of cups turns into laughter too sharp to be innocent. Helen's departure with Paris has already seeded rumor like wildfire, but long before ships were summoned, the Spartans themselves were telling stories about their own tangled rites. And you, drifting invisibly through the rooms, realize Aphrodite has been busy here too, not with sweeping gestures, but with strange, awkward fingerprints that stain every tale. You probably won't survive the onslaught of these rumors, because they're half truth, half invention, and all scandal. and they remind you uncomfortably of the way high school gossip can topple reputations before the principal even arrives. 1. Story catches your ear. The claim that Spartan brides were often disguised as men on their wedding night, their hair cut short, their clothes swapped, as if marriage itself had to pass through the stage of deception before it could be consummated. Was this tradition truly common, or just an odd anecdote magnified by outsiders eager to brand Sparta as strange? Historians still argue whether this practice was ritual or rumor, but either way, you can almost picture Aphrodite hovering in the shadows, smirking as she tinkers with gender and desire, creating awkward encounters designed to confuse as much as to inflame. Imagine a new husband reaching for his veiled bride, only to find himself momentarily startled by the illusion of another man. It's like a prank disguised as a sacrament. And Aphrodite would have loved it. The stories multiply. Some say Spartans shared wives, arranging elaborate exchanges that blurred the line between fidelity and community, their justification rooted in producing stronger heirs. You watch these tales ripple like waves, every retelling exaggerated until they become theater. Aphrodite's influence is there in the background, encouraging experimentation, nudging mortals toward rituals that feel half sacred, half farce. It's not unlike the bizarre details tucked into Vatsyayana's Kama Sutra, where certain chapters advise couples to imitate animal cries during intimacy to strengthen bonds. Picture a dignified Spartan warrior lowing like a cow while his wife, disguised as a boy, tries not to laugh. Quirky, yes, but in the messy mechanics of attraction, awkwardness often forges the strongest glue. You drift deeper into the city, past colonnades and training yards, and notice how even the hardest soldiers, men raised on discipline and spear drills, are not immune to these stories. They whisper them in tents, repeat them in the baths, each rumor stretched into comedy or warning. Aphrodite's tricks ripple outward, not in grand revelations, but in nudges that reshape culture itself. You recall a passage from Peter Webb's The Erotic Spirit Through History about how entire societies often embed their sexual anxieties into ritual, wrapping their discomfort in ceremony so they can laugh while trembling. That's exactly what you see here. Laughter hiding unease, ritual hiding rebellion, love hiding power. Helen, of course, is the centerpiece of it all. Her absence from Sparta isn't just scandal, it's proof that the gossip is true, that Aphrodite's meddling can topple even the most disciplined city. Every whisper about her fuels a bonfire that makes men angrier, women warier, and alliances shakier. And behind it all stands the goddess, proud of her handiwork even though her methods are as graceless as a goat in a banquet hall. She thrives. In the awkward gaps, the mismatched costumes, the jokes that turn serious when no one laughs. The irony is that these odd practices, whether real or exaggerated, become weapons as sharp as swords. Enemies mock Sparta for its strangeness, allies question its honor, and slowly the lines between domestic scandal and international conflict blur. Gossip becomes strategy. Rumor becomes a call to arms. Aphrodite, in her fumbling way, has discovered that the quickest path to war isn't through rage but through embarrassment. No king can tolerate being laughed at forever, and no queen can vanish without igniting the kind of stories that demand resolution and blood. You lean closer to one of the courtyards, where a group of elders debate furiously. One insists these tales of cross-dressing brides are slander spread by jealous rivals. Another swears he saw it himself, and a third shrugs, muttering that maybe it doesn't matter whether it's true if everyone believes it. The torchlight flickers over their furrowed brows, and you realize the truth isn't important, the performance is. That is Aphrodite's awkward genius again, turning hearsay into reality by sheer force of repetition. It's the same principle Eleanor Herman describes in her Tales of Mistresses, where repeating a rumor often mattered more than proving it. If everyone believes the king's mistress controls policy, then she does, whether she actually whispers advice or not. The scene swirls into laughter, shouting, clashing cups, and you, caught in the middle, feel the sharp pull of inevitability. Helen's departure isn't just a love story. It's the trigger that makes every old rumor believable, every odd ritual scandalous, every whisper dangerous. By the time the ships are summoned, the war is already won, not on the battlefield, but in the bedrooms, banquet halls, and back corridors of Sparta. And you realize with a chill that Aphrodite's awkward sex tricks, as strange and silly as they seem, are about to transform from jokes into tragedies. Played on the grandest stage of all. You move with the shifting wind, now into the canvas labyrinth of war tents pitched on the dusty plains outside Troy, where the night smells of sweat, smoke, and leather stretched too thin. The air trembles with the low murmur of warriors, voices carried like secrets between flickering torch posts, and in the midst of this restless sprawl, Aphrodite prowls unseen, slipping between guy ropes and shields as though the camp itself is her stage. You probably won't survive the pull of these whispers, because they are stickier than honey and far more dangerous, and you sense immediately that the battlefield is not only swords and shields, but also mattresses and murmurs. She does not wield her beauty here like a blazing torch, but as little sparks tossed onto dry, kindling suggestions. Awkward nudges, half-baked instructions whispered into ears already tired of waiting for dawn. Soldiers clutch dice cups, but their minds are on other games, and Aphrodite is more than happy to supply the rules. However clumsy. In one corner, you overhear a young warrior bragging about a trick he swears came from a goddess. That a touch at the right wrist is more binding than a promise sealed in wine. His friends laugh, daring him to test it on a servant girl fetching water, and when he does, she nearly drops the jug, unsure whether to be offended or flattered. The joke ricochets through the tent, yet beneath the laughter is envy. These men are restless, homesick, trapped in a war measured in years, and Aphrodite knows boredom breeds desire faster than wine. She slips tidbits into their talk like pebbles into shoes, uncomfortable yet impossible to ignore. Some claim to have heard of foreign kings who kept lovers disguised as priests. Others insist there are charms to make women faithful for exactly 3 nights and no more. Historians still argue whether these campfire rumors had any basis in ritual, but you can feel how quickly they become currency, traded back and forth until they seem as solid as bronze coin. Paris himself wanders through these tents sometimes, and you watch the way his presence sparks both admiration and disdain. He is the man who stole Helen, yet he looks less like a conqueror and more like a youth still rehearsing affection under divine coaching. Aphrodite hovers close, still urging him with the same awkward cues that once toppled his composure. Linger on the gaze, stumble on purpose, let her think she steadies you. It is almost comedic, yet somehow it still works, for Helen clings to him in a way that both enrages and fascinates the watching soldiers. They whisper that Aphrodite must still be at work, because no man alone could hold such a queen with so little skill. From another corner of memory surfaces a tale in Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings, about how mistresses in Versailles sometimes pretended jealousy at random moments, deliberately staged quarrels to reignite passion. Aphrodite dabbles in similar tactics here, sowing spats between couples in the camp, ensuring reconciliation feels sweeter than fidelity. You see warriors sneaking away from dice games to make amends in private, returning with grins wide enough to unsettle their comrades. The goddess thrives on these awkward cycles: fight, sulk, reconcile, because they keep emotions raw, volatile, and ready to spill over into other arenas. Like battlefields, quirky customs creep in too. Some Greek soldiers carry small carved figurines of hermaphroditic deities, stroking them before combat for luck, as though sexual ambiguity itself could ward off spears. It's a detail that feels absurd yet deeply human, and you imagine Aphrodite nudging them toward it with a chuckle. Peter Webb's writings mention similar charms in medieval courts, where lovers exchanged oddly shaped amulets believed to guarantee passion, though half the time they resembled vegetables more than sacred relics. The awkwardness of belief, the silliness of the object, mattered less than the comfort of carrying desire into danger. The camp becomes a cauldron, bubbling with half-jokes, strange charms, and the low simmer of suspicion. Aphrodite ensures that no tent is free of distraction, no soldier wholly focused on war. One man mutters that his wife back home might already have taken another. Another insists Helen is proof no woman can be trusted. These are not noble speeches, fit for epics, but petty jealousies stretched until they fray. And yet they matter, because they corrode unity faster than any Trojan spear. You stand among them and feel how fragile this army is, how easily it could collapse under the weight of rumors alone. Paris slips into Helen's pavilion that night, and though their silhouettes are graceful in lamplight, the reality is clumsy. He drops a sandal, she stifles a laugh. Aphrodite sighs with exaggerated patience. Still, the effect is undeniable. The awkward intimacy they share is enough to keep the war smoldering, a reminder to every soldier outside that this conflict is not only about honor, but about a woman held by a boy coached in divine flirting. And as the night deepens, the goddess whispers into the ears of generals as well, not strategies of spears, but of suspicions. Who envies whom? Who fears betrayal? Who might falter tomorrow? By the time dawn bleeds across the plain, you realize Aphrodite has transformed the camp itself into her theater. No soldier thinks only of war. Every man and woman is tangled in a net of gossip, charms, rituals, and awkward little performances that gnaw at loyalty. It is not the clang of swords you hear most clearly, but the hush of secrets traded in dark corners, the muffled laughter. After an ill-timed compliment, the sigh of a soldier dreaming of someone far away. And in that fragile symphony, you know the goddess has already won another victory. Not with grace, not with brilliance, but with the persistent, clumsy power of desire. You drift now into the grand pavilion where Helen sits as though carved from ivory, every gesture both weary and magnetic, and you feel the weight of her presence more than any jewel or robe she wears. Around her the war churns like a storm, yet here in this chamber she's not only queen but bargaining chip, not only woman but weapon, and Aphrodite's invisible hand keeps nudging the pieces into place. The air smells of incense and sea salt, carried inland on the breeze, and you catch the murmur of envoys arguing just outside, voices rising and falling like dice thrown across a table. To them Helen is a prize, a symbol of honor and humiliation, yet to Paris she is still the woman he fumbled to impress, guided by the goddess's awkward coaching. You probably won't survive the contradictions in this room, queen or hostage, lover or trophy, because each role shifts like sand underfoot, and you realize Aphrodite has made ambiguity itself her sharpest trick. Inside, Paris tries again, to prove himself worthy, draping Helen with ornaments that glitter but don't quite fit, promising love in words that sound rehearsed, stumbling over vows as though the goddess were feeding him lines through a faulty whispering horn. Helen smiles, faintly, indulgent and resigned, her beauty shining through the cracks of frustration. Historians still argue whether she was willing participant or captive, whether her heart beat faster at Paris's touch or shrank at the chains of circumstance. The truth may be both, and that double vision is exactly what Aphrodite wanted. No single narrative to settle, only the messy, awkward blur that keeps mortals arguing forever. The envoys press their case, return her and end this madness. But Paris, coached by divine meddling, cannot let go. His grip is more desperate than noble, and you watch him falter as he tries to summon speeches of devotion. Helen, perhaps out of pity, lays her hand upon his, and the pavilion sighs with tension. Outside, generals scowl, seeing not tenderness but insult, their honor gnawed raw by the sight of a queen reduced to prize. Aphrodite's grin hovers in the air, because nothing destabilizes men faster than the suspicion that their honor can be undone by laughter, by gossip, by the awkward sight of passion played out like amateur theater. Quirky customs surface in these negotiations. Some recall tales from distant lands where brides were exchanged as part of truces, while others mutter about charms that could force a woman's affection to sway whichever way the spellcaster desired. You think of a passage from the history of sexuality, where Foucault muses on how power often disguises itself through intimacy. Here in this tent the same is true. Helen is both desired and debated, her body a battlefield where politics and passion collide. You can almost hear Aphrodite urging Paris to lean on sentiment, to make speeches about love eternal, while the generals outside measure her worth in ships and spears. And then there's the strange echo from other times. Peter Webb describes, in the erotic spirit through history, how certain medieval courts treated mistresses as diplomatic tools, arranging liaisons not for pleasure, but for alliances. Helen fits that pattern now, her beauty a coin too valuable to spend, and Aphrodite keeps flipping it in the air, ensuring it never lands long enough for peace. The awkwardness lies in how obvious it is. Everyone knows she is both lover and hostage, yet no one can agree which role dominates. That uncertainty gnaws deeper than certainty ever could. Paris clings tighter, insisting love justifies all, his words dripping with sincerity, yet wobbling like a stool with one leg shorter than the others. Helen lowers her eyes, and you sense resignation more than passion, a queen who knows her name has become shorthand for war. Outside, soldiers mutter bitterly, some wishing Paris had never been born, others whispering that Aphrodite herself must be mocking them all. The goddess revels in it, her awkward tricks working better than polished strategies ever could, because in every uncertain pause she plants more suspicion, more envy, more rage. The tent grows hotter, incense mingling with sweat, and you feel the claustrophobia of a world where desire is never private, but always public, always politicized. Helen shifts in her seat, the fabric of her robe catching lamplight, and even that small gesture seems to sway the balance of power. Is she leaning toward Paris or away? Does she love or loathe him? The ambiguity itself becomes the spark, and Aphrodite fans it gleefully, knowing full well that men will kill each other, not only for women, but for the stories they invent about women. By the time the envoys storm out, peace shattered, you understand that Helen is no longer merely Helen. She is myth in motion, a living symbol of pride and humiliation, shaped by Aphrodite's clumsy yet effective meddling. Her sighs ripple into strategies, her glances harden into grudges, and the awkward theater inside this pavilion guarantees the battlefield outside will never rest. And you, watching silently, realize the greatest trick of all is not seduction, but confusion, leaving mortals unable to decide whether they're fighting for love, for honor, or simply to erase the embarrassment Aphrodite has sown so recklessly. You find yourself now in a dim library centuries removed from Troy, dust swirling in golden shafts of light, parchments piled like fragile corpses of memory, and the hook that grabs you by the collar is this: even now, with cities long reduced to rubble, scholars still argue whether Aphrodite's awkward meddling mattered more than swords, whether her clumsy sex tricks tipped the scales of history harder than any bronze spear. You probably won't survive the tug-of-war of voices here, because each page you turn whispers a different truth. Each historian convinced their version is the one that Helen herself might have chosen if only she had been free to speak. One insists it was all Paris's fault. Another claims Helen was a prisoner of lust spun by divine strings. A third mutters that the war would have happened anyway, because kings crave excuses the way drunkards crave wine. Yet the debates never end, and you feel yourself sinking into the fascination of their uncertainty. Foucault would smile here, reminding you that power often hides in the crevices of intimacy, that the bedroom can shape the battlefield more than the council chamber ever could. His idea echoes in every argument you overhear. Some scholars frame Helen as victim of divine coercion, others as agent wielding sexuality as her weapon, and still others as nothing more than a pawn. The truth, slippery as olive oil, is perhaps all of these at once, and that very ambiguity is Aphrodite's clumsiest but most enduring legacy. The goddess did not choreograph elegance. She left humans bumbling through confusion, and the confusion itself has lasted longer than marble temples. You stumble on an anecdote from Eleanor, Hermann's sex with kings, about how mistresses could sway entire nations simply by refusing to appear at a banquet. How absence itself became louder than presence. Helen embodies that absence multiplied. Her vanishing from Sparta becomes the silence that screams across centuries. Historians circle like vultures over this silence, each pecking a different meaning. Was she coerced, complicit, or simply exhausted? They still argue, and in their arguments you feel the awkward fingerprints of Aphrodite, who never wanted clarity, only chaos disguised as desire. Quirky fragments scatter through these debates. 2. One scholar points to the Mesopotamian ritual of burning onions as love charms, claiming Aphrodite must have borrowed from such awkward practices to stage Helen's enchantment. Another insists Greek soldiers carried tiny wax figures shaped into obscene positions to ward off impotence, laughing at the absurdity, yet convinced it mattered. You can almost hear Peter Webb chuckling from the pages of the erotic spirit through history, reminding readers that human intimacy has always balanced between the ridiculous and the divine. That balance, uncomfortable and strange, is exactly what keeps the Trojan War alive, not just as history, but as obsession. The clamor of voices grows louder. Some argue Helen was a mere excuse for resource wars, a shiny story pasted over the messy reality of trade routes and egos. Others demand that love, or lust, or whatever Aphrodite meddled with, cannot be dismissed so easily, because without that spark no army would have sailed, no city would have burned. You drift among these scholars like a ghost, your head filled with overlapping claims, and realize that their inability to agree is proof enough of the goddess's success. Even in awkwardness she commands attention. Even in failure she wins, because mortals cannot stop talking about her. And here's the unsettling part. Each theory you hear feels plausible for a moment, then collapses under its own weight, leaving you more uncertain than before. Was Helen laughing when she left with Paris? Was she crying? Did Paris stumble into love like a boy tripping over his sandals? Or did he calculate every move with Aphrodite as his co-conspirator? The torches of Troy are long extinguished, but the sparks fly still in every university hall, every symposium, every quiet midnight debate among historians who should know better but can't resist. You lean closer to one parchment. Its ink faded, yet its passion fresh, and the words leap out. Historians still argue whether beauty or deception began the war. You smile because it's the same uncertainty you've carried through this entire journey. The same awkward charm that has made you follow Aphrodite's trail despite her fumbles. The goddess thrives on your confusion, whispering even now that ambiguity is more seductive than clarity, that questions can bind tighter than answers. By the time you leave the library, the dust thicker on your skin than memory itself. You understand that Aphrodite's greatest victory was not Helen's departure, not Paris's devotion, not even the fall of Troy. It was this, that centuries later, mortals still sit in rooms arguing, their voices heated, their cheeks flushed, their minds entangled not in certainty, but in the endless, awkward, intoxicating mystery of desire. You arrive at twilight on the smoking plains outside Troy, where the last embers of battle crackle like dying stars in the grass. And the hook that seizes you is this: the war is over, yet Aphrodite's clumsy fingerprints linger longer than the clang of swords, longer than the screams of dying heroes, longer than the walls themselves that now slump into ruin. You probably won't survive the sight of this aftermath, because it feels less like a victory and more like a stage after. The actors have gone, costumes strewn across the floor, props broken, yet the memory of the performance still vibrating in the air. The goddess walks through the wreckage not as a triumphant figure, but as an awkward stagehand, gathering scraps of desire and embarrassment, knowing her strange little tricks, missteps, half-promises, fumbling seductions have rewritten history. More profoundly than the spears of Achilles or the arrows of Philo-C to E8. Helen moves through the ruins like a ghost wearing skin. Her face as unreadable as marble statues, yet her presence undeniable. Is she returning to Sparta in shame or triumph? As wife or as widow? As survivor or as symbol? Historians still argue, their voices echoing across centuries. But here in this twilight you see her caught in the web of Aphrodite's meddling. No longer free to be only herself. She is the story, the embodiment of rumor and desire, the awkward prize that became a curse. Paris is gone, his charm extinguished with his breath, and yet his memory clings because of the goddess's strange tutoring his. Fumbling lines, his nervous hands, his boyish devotion that somehow unraveled empires. Quirky details scatter the battlefield even now. Soldiers tense, abandoned in haste, hold charms shaped like animals, amulets meant to guarantee passion or fertility. One clay figurine depicts a man and woman locked in a pose that looks less divine and more comical. A reminder that even in war the absurdity of intimacy persists. You imagine Aphrodite chuckling, pleased that mortals carry her lessons even into slaughter, convinced that awkward gestures hold as much power as polished ones. From Eleanor Herman's tales of kings undone by mistresses to Vatiana's advice about filling silences with playful nonsense, every scrap of history seems to nod at this battlefield, whispering that the great Trojan War was never just about power or land, but about the blunders of desire amplified until they shook the world. As night seeps in, the ruins breathe like a tired beast, and you feel the shift from spectacle to memory. The heroes are gone, their names etched into epic verses, yet it is Aphrodite's awkward game that lingers most sharply in your mind. She never delivered a flawless seduction. She delivered confusion, hesitation, and stumbles, and in those small cracks destiny poured like floodwater. It is almost comical, almost tragic, that a goddess of love should win not by elegance, but by clumsiness. And yet you see now that this is her genius, to remind mortals that desire is never clean, never simple, never without its humiliations. Helen pauses before the sea, the horizon aflame with the last reflection of Troy's ruins, and you cannot read whether she regrets or accepts. Perhaps both. She embodies the contradiction that will haunt scholars forever. Was she the victim, the accomplice, the catalyst, or the scapegoat? You realize the answer doesn't matter, because Aphrodite made sure the ambiguity would outlive the facts. The war has ended, but the questions have only begun, and they will coil through history like ivy choking marble columns. The campfires dim one by one, leaving only the hush of waves and the smell of ash, and you understand that the story has reached not its conclusion, but its echo. Aphrodite drifts away, her smirk half embarrassed, half satisfied, like a trickster who can't quite believe her prank toppled kingdoms. You feel her brush past you, leaving behind the faintest scent of roses soured by smoke, and you know she will try again, somewhere, with other mortals just as clumsy and just as vulnerable to awkward tricks disguised as fate. And so the curtain falls on Troy, yet the audience never leaves. Mortals still lean forward, still whisper, still debate, still blush at the thought that love and war are forever entangled in ways both ridiculous and profound. You carry that realization with you into the quiet, the recognition that even in ruin, desire writes the script no general can erase. The embers cool, the goddess fades, and the story exhales its final sigh. The sand beneath your feet grows soft, the night air heavy but calm, and your breathing slows with the ruins. History has burned itself out, but the memory drifts gently now, like smoke curling into stars, and you feel yourself soften with it. Safe in the knowledge that awkwardness and beauty, confusion and longing, have always been part of the human story. Let the scholars argue. Let the ruins crumble. For tonight you need only close your eyes, sink into stillness, and rest. The echoes of Troy will keep themselves. End of script. Sweet dreams.